What does it mean to float? Because we can float. We like making things that can float. Many plants, animals, and even microbes can float. Even some rocks can float. So to understand why things float, let's break it down into 5 questions. First, we discuss the physics of floating. Second, why floating mattered for the origin of life. Third, why living things today float. Fourth, why floating matters for us. And fifth, what floating will mean for our future. Firstly, let's quickly go over the physics. Because why is it even possible for something to float? Or, to do the opposite, and sink. We use these words to describe a movement up or down inside a material. Remember that there are 3 states a material can be in. I can pass my hand through a gas, through a liquid, but not through a solid. These 2 act like a fluid. Their molecules can slide over each other. But no matter the matter, any matter can pass through a fluid, be it a gas, a liquid, or a solid. Now you might say that heavier things sink and lighter things float, and you'd be mostly right and a little bit wrong. We're actually talking about a difference in density. That is the weight of something, but comparing it to its volume. This rock has a volume of about 350 milliliters. When I put it in water, its total volume rises from 500 to about 850 milliliters. 350 milliliters of rock is heavier than 350 milliliters of water. So then what about this other rock? Clearly, it weighs less than that same volume of water because it floats. This is pumice. It's a volcanic rock. While it was still molten, gases expanded inside and formed bubbles, which remained even after it solidified. We need to count the volume of the gas too, so the total rock weighs less than water, but more than air, so it will stabilize somewhere in between. It always amazes me that these same principles apply even to giant cargo ships. Because what is a boat but a really big cup? When I push down with the cup, it's like I'm filling my ship with cargo. Notice how I'm taking air along with me. That volume of water is much heavier than the volume of air. If you've ever done dishes, you'll have felt the force of the water pushing back. When I push down with enough force to let the water flow inside, now only the density of the cup itself matters, which sinks. It's cool, isn't it? Generally, the bigger the difference in density, the quicker something will float or sink, until it stabilizes. We humans have a pretty similar density to water. About 65% of our body weight is water. But we're still different enough in density that it usually takes a little bit of energy to stay afloat. So, to summarize, things can go up or down in a fluid based on its density. And that's all the physics we'll need. I'm a biologist. I want to start looking at what floating has meant for life on Earth. Like floating, life is just the natural result of the laws of physics. When I introduce energy into this bottle by shaking it, physics causes the 2 liquids inside to move and after a short while become stable. To live means to shake your bottle. Because if you, watching this, are alive, well, congrats, you're unstable. Life is an ongoing chemical reaction. It uses energy to build and move, and therefore it is never stable. Unless you run out of energy, or you're unable to find any more, and you stop being able to shake your bottle, you become stable, and therefore you die. In that way, our planet is alive too. While Earth may not be actively seeking out energy like life eventually evolved to do, its bottle is constantly being shaken by the sun and the moon, its own molten core, and by the life that inhabits it. By far, the most abundant fluid on Earth is liquid water. Most of it in the oceans, which is always being stirred up at least a little bit by the wind and the tides. The ideal place for life's first chemical reaction to get started is a place with lots and lots of chemicals. One such place is the area around hydrothermal vents. Here, cracks in the Earth crust bring water closer to its core, heating it to hundreds of degrees Celsius. Oh, it's cold. Now you've probably noticed that water is great at dissolving things, especially when it's hot. The hydrothermal vents bring tons of dissolved materials from the rocks into the ocean, providing many of the essential building blocks that life needs. That's very sweet. One thing that we have in common with every living being is that we're all made of at least one cell. That's because 4 billion years ago, we all looked like this. Okay, maybe not this size. We were much, much smaller and also not made of synthetic rubber. But this shows off 2 key traits that every living being has. Firstly, we have fluid on the inside with bits in it, and we have a flexible membrane on the outside that only lets through some chemicals. And that has been crucial for life to develop. To have a way to make what's on your inside different from what's on your outside. Now, at this primitive stage, we couldn't move yet, but that's not actually a very big deal. And I'll show you why. I'm stuck. Because of the movement of the water, sometimes those essential building blocks just get close enough for you to eat. But what if we could move? We might end up in new places where there could be so much more to eat. And this might actually be easier than we think. When chemical reactions take place, gases are often formed. Thanks to the membrane, that gas can stay trapped inside the cell, lowering its average density. And what do you think happens? It floats. I think this might be the easiest form of movement that life can achieve at this point. It's just using a very simple chemical reaction to go in a direction instead of just going with the flow. Regardless of how it happened, once life reached the top few milliliters of water, they encountered a completely new world. One with a deadly laser in the sky. Sun rays are highly energetic. It's why they feel warm, but also why they can tear apart life's molecules like DNA. But as we now know, life needs energy. And so while the sun was a problem, it also provided a massive opportunity for life to stop relying on energy from passing chemicals and start relying on the energy from a star instead. Photosynthesis evolved, maybe from mechanisms that first evolved to protect against UV radiation. And this was a global game changer, converting the energy from the sun into a shitload of biomass. Loser cells like us, who can't even photosynthesize, suddenly had an all-you-can-eat salad bar, thereby distributing the energy from the sun into all parts of the system of life, shaking bigger and bigger bubbles. With more energy available and easier conditions thanks to lowered CO2 levels and a fresh new ozone layer, life could explode into a huge diversity of forms and strategies. Occasionally, cells started sticking together and became multicellular, forming many of the plants, animals, and fungi that we see today. Eventually, the water even became crowded, and life started exploring land, adapting again and again and again to the new problems and opportunities that this new world offered. So, in summary, floating gave early life access to an almost limitless supply of energy, paving the way for all life that evolved since. Some of those life forms today now also float. But what do they gain from this? In general, life can settle in a new place if 3 important elements are available. The first is sustenance. This is the kind of stuff that keeps you alive. It's food, nutrients, water, oxygen, light in the case of our photosynthetic friends. The second is safety. A new space might take you away from stuff that wants to eat you or make you sick or in other way damage your body. And the third is space. If a place is already overly crowded, then it can be really hard to get a foothold unless you try a different strategy. These 3 elements, sustenance, safety, and space, drew life onto land. But remember that this has been just as relevant for us. Like during the multiple points in our prehistory that our human ancestors migrated from Africa to colonize other parts of the world. And sustenance can come in the form of money too, which drew my Dutch ancestors to... sorry, let's not talk about that yet. Anyway, floating as a strategy, as a way of life, could offer all 3 elements to the right species. These benefits drove the evolution of different ways of capturing air in many oceanic creatures. These snails blow bubbles in their slime and make a little bubbly raft. This slug just gulps air straight into its stomach. Both of these mollusks float, upside down by the way, because they eat other floating creatures, like this Portuguese man o' war. They form an air bladder with a little sail that allows them to get pushed along the ocean, catching food along the way with their long tentacles. Some seaweeds capture air from their photosynthesis in these little bladders. This brings them closer to the surface and thus the sunlight, and lets them float along the ocean currents, getting spread all over the world. But not all species we see on or in water have always been there, because by now, land was getting crowded too, and some species could find more sustenance, safety, and space in or on the water. Famous examples include seals, who evolved from the same ancestor as cats and dogs and bears. Or dinosaurs, who took to the air and then to the water. For many, the adaptations they needed to live on land turned out to be pretty damn useful for life in or on water. Now, when you think about floating plants, you might think about water lilies. The leaves of a water lily float on top of the water, making use of all of that free surface area to soak up the sunlight. But all of this is underwater. Strong fibrous stems evolved in land plants to help them stay upright against gravity, something that a green seaweed, for instance, doesn't have to deal with. But fighting gravity is no longer important for a water lily, so it uses that stem as a kind of root, growing horizontally into the mud and anchoring it down. Hij is echt heel erg dood. So these green stems are actually leaf stalks. But they still show off their land origin, because inside of them are those springy fibers. And I think this is really cool because it allows the leaf to bob up and down along with the waves without the risk of tearing that stem out of the mud. So, in summary, both creatures who never left the water and those who spent some time on land found floating to be a useful strategy, offering sustenance, safety, and space. And we land animals can often be found in water too. But why is floating so great for us? Well, even though the water is about 5 degrees, let me show you. Floating was a lot harder than I thought. I had to really hold my breath to stay afloat, and even still I needed to move my hands a little bit and spend some energy. And I had to spend a lot more energy if I wanted to swim anywhere. We didn't evolve to be able to float, but having lungs and fat still has floating as a handy side effect. You know, to prevent the whole drowning thing. But I don't like to spend energy. I want things to be easy, so I'd much rather be sitting on something else that floats. Look, I can sit here and be moved around and it takes me 0 effort. If I want to go there instead, I can spend some energy to paddle, but that would still be much easier than keeping my head up and swimming all that way. The first boats were just natural rafts. It's fallen trees or other debris clumped together and forming these floating islands. And humans weren't the first animals to use these boats. Monkeys, reptiles, insects, and more are all believed to have been blown onto these rafts during storms and made huge oceanic voyages. This may also be how humanoids crossed the 20 or so kilometers of ocean more than 1 million years ago and settled on the island of Flores, today part of Indonesia. But you don't have to wait for a raft to appear if you can just make one yourself, which these people might have been able to do with the stone tools that they had available to them. The better the tools, the better the rafts, and so our boats evolved along with the rest of our technology. Better stone tools and fire making let us turn tree into cup for better stability and steering. Eventually, we'd carve planks and make nails and create boats much bigger than a single log could be. Bigger boats means more people, more paddles, more weight that can be transported. Because that's what boats are. They are the earliest form of transports that humans have developed, one that can be faster, more efficient, and bring you places where walking just cannot bring you. With a boat, you can bring fish back from the water into your home. You can meet people far outside that home and exchange food and knowledge, artwork and tools, stories and religions, weapons and diseases. Already during the late Stone Age, we were trading cool and useful rocks like obsidian with people thousands of kilometers away. But maybe the biggest advancement in boat technology came when we found ways to stop relying only on energy from animals and humans to power our boats, and started relying on the energy of the Earth itself. This is a technology that came about from developments of ropes and nets and clothing, and it's called a sail! Okay, it's time. So in 1602, the Dutch East Asian Trading Company, or the Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie, was founded, and it would sail mainly between Europe and Asia, and especially Indonesia. It quickly became one of the biggest companies ever, with its own army, its own coins, and its own monopoly on the trade of spices and people. About 1.6 million enslaved people were traded during the 2 centuries that this company was around for, and many were forced to work on the ships under terrible conditions. So, in many ways, this was like the Amazon of its time. Except instead of next day delivery, it was more like next year delivery, and only if you were lucky. Because if your ship came back with half its crew missing, hey, that's reason to celebrate, because in about a third of the cases, the ships would just not return at all. And these ships were crazy expensive. So the company would borrow money from rich people who would bet on whether a ship would return or not. Actually, I have an ancient contract to show you this. So if a ship came back with riches, then the rich people would get richer. And if the ship was lost, well, then you sunk your costs. Does this remind you of anything? Because this was the evolution of the stock market, where the word floating is now being used as a metaphor for things that go up and down. So without boats or the physics of floating, our world would have looked very different, and we wouldn't have had to deal with capitalism or NFTs. So, in summary, floating gave humans an easy way to travel and trade, driving the development of our economy and our technology. But how are we now using our economy and building our knowledge to improve future lives? And how could looking at cool bugs make our global shipping economy 30% more efficient? If there's anything that developing science has taught us, it's that life is weird. Something like water seems like it's the simplest thing ever, but once you actually look below the surface and start asking some questions, some wonderfully weird answers come floating up. Because did you know that water is sticky? Every water molecule sort of acts like a really tiny magnet. They are attracted to, and they can dissolve, hydrophilic or water-loving substances like salts and sugars. But water itself is also hydrophilic. It attracts other water molecules. This stickiness is what causes water tension, that allows you to overfill a glass, or why a droplet can stick to your finger. But it also sticks to ships, and that's a really big deal, because it slows them down and you need more energy to keep moving at the same speed. Life in general has been developing its floating technologies for much longer than we've been building ships. It's already found many ways to deal with this stickiness, like coating itself in a hydrophobic or water-repellent material, like oil or wax. But while water tension causes a lot of problems, it also provides opportunities for solutions. So far, all floating creatures and objects we've discussed have all been at least partially submerged, balancing their densities at the top layer. But these bugs are different. They are called water striders, and like me, they have hairy legs. But their hairs, unlike mine, are microscopically small and hydrophobic. Water cannot stick to it, and so it will try to pull itself together. So the hairs sort of push away the water, so that only the very tips remain submerged. Air can flow and settle in between the hairs. So in a way, this bug is actually standing on air. These kinds of hairs evolved countless times across evolution. Some take on pretty crazy shapes, like this little floating fern. You can see a sort of shimmery air layer when I push down with my finger. That's the air getting trapped by the hairs. These kinds of hairs are currently being studied to use as a coating on giant ships, where a thin air layer could massively reduce drag from the water, with estimates of a more than 30% reduction in energy loss, and therefore lowering CO2 emissions. Now, I know that lately there's been a lot of discussion about funding science, with many people and politicians saying that we shouldn't pay a bunch of nerds to look at bugs and duckweed all day. But all of the problems that we face today have been faced by life in some form or another throughout evolution. And therefore, all of our solutions can be inspired by the ways that life has solved them. A physical phenomenon like floating comes up again and again and again, influencing the ways that life, including ourselves, have evolved over time, forming invisible connections between life at every size, complexity, and point in history. Even though we don't even notice this, unless we take a moment to study it. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to study more of these kinds of connections with me, please subscribe and recommend this video to a friend. Ask your questions or share personal knowledge or experiences about the topic of floating in the comments, so I can learn from you.